Hi, Dustin.
Why, hello, how are you?
Great, thank you. I really appreciate that you agreed to meet me here today and carry on our conversation we had recently where you started to tell me some what I thought were really interesting things about your life and made me want to know more. How are you feeling today?
Feeling pretty good.
Good, okay. So I guess the first question I have is, where are you living at the moment?
I'm living at Harbor Light Treatment Center on 119 Cordova.
And so you're in treatment?
Yes, I am.
While you're there. And how long have you lived there?
I've lived there for 4 months.
Okay, so your treatment is, this is your first treatment center of this round, so your treatment is 4 months long so far?
This is my second round in treatment. My first treatment was April 2 years ago. Okay. And I had another year and a bit on the streets, and I joined treatment again at Harbor Light in July.
Okay, so second time Harbor Light.
First time at Harbor Light, I went to treatment and interventions before.
All right, thanks. Okay, and so we want to go way back now to, where were you born?
I was born in Calgary, Alberta in 1980.
And did you also grow up there?
No, I only lived there 6 months, and because of the cold winter they had because of the explosion of Mount St. Helens, my parents decided to move back to Burnaby where they fell in love.
And so you grew up mostly in Burnaby?
Grew up in Queensborough, New West, Surrey. I moved around quite a bit in my first 9 years of life.
Okay, all right. So that's with both of your parents?
Yeah.
Okay, so about your childhood, let's find out a little bit more about that. Was it generally a happy childhood or family memories?
There was a lot of happy memories, but there was a lot of chaotic memories. In the moment, what happened in my life just seemed normal. So some of the things that I found to be happy in retrospect weren't the most healthiest things, but there were a lot of good memories.
Okay, and did you have brothers and sisters?
I had a sister. I became a brother when I was 3 years old, and that's my only sibling.
All right, and how about school life? How was that for you?
School life was very tumultuous in my first 9 years. I believe, if I remember correctly, I went to 14 schools in my first, till grade 4. Mainly because we had to move around a lot. My dad got evicted quite a bit. There was a lot of violence in the home, a lot of alcoholism, a lot of parties. So there's a lot of evictions, a lot of unpaid rents. I even had one of my elementary schools burned down. Queen Elizabeth Elementary School in Queensborough. So that took a lot of school. So I missed a lot of school. And because there was a lot of chaos going on in my house, I needed glasses for the longest time, and that went unnoticed. So they put me in remedial classes. So by the time my parents separated when I was 9, school was a terrible experience for me. But then once my mom had the courage to leave my dad, I went to the same elementary school until high school, and things started getting a lot better. They discovered I needed glasses. I learned how to read. I learned how to write. I got very involved in community activities like in St. John Ambulance, writing club, AV club, library volunteerism, and I sunk my head into books. And I was able to catch up by the time in grade 7. I was at a 10th grade reading level. By the time I was in grade 8, I was at a university reading level.
Wow. Okay, so you had obviously a lot of ability, great ability for learning and being held back like that. Yeah, to make up for lost time and then some.
There was a gratitude for myself for being able to do something that I wasn't able to do. And it also, I'd say reading became my first addiction because it was a way for me to escape when I had thoughts I didn't like come up or memories. I could sink into a book. I could learn something. I'd stick very much to technical things and horror. I loved horror, sci-fi, and just raw material, science data. And I became a fan of poetry and writing short stories and things like that.
That's great. And how about home life? It improved being just with your mother?
Violence left the home.
Yeah, okay.
Violence left the home, and I started just things became more stable in the sense where I could get involved in family life. You know, even though for the first little bit my mom was on welfare, she decided to go to school and educate herself. And so that brought a lot of intellect into the home. And she started becoming more tied with her roots of becoming politically active and being involved in community organizations like the Anti-Poverty Committee and just the company that would come over with her going to university. There was a lot of intellect in the home. There was a lot of people with degrees, and it was completely different than the drugs and parties I grew up with. You know, so it was a big contrast, and with that contrast had its benefits and it had its deficits, because that's when I started discovering that I had a lot of abuse in my life, and that's when cycles of depression started coming into my life. When I reflect on it, I used to think I had bipolar disorder because I would have highs and I'd have lows, but when I reflect, that was the cycles of bad things would happen, and then there would be a makeup for those bad things. So I guess my muscle memory went into that cycle, and physiologically my hormones were already on a cycle that it took a long time to get out of. And going into high school, I started wanting to understand what happened, and that's where marijuana came into my life. LSD came into my life, which I found very therapeutic at the time, because it was a way of adding a calm to it, a loving energy to it, and it was a way of doing self-therapy without having somebody be invasive and prying into what was wrong in an environment where it's very uncomfortable.
All right, so you started off with those two substances, and where did things go from there? Did other substances come along?
Not till later. There was a periodic alcohol use, but I was much more into marijuana and LSD. And with that, in grade 8, it was very early on in the internet, and I went to a school, Sir Winston Churchill, which had a lot of international baccalaureate, but there's also a more intellectual crime element at that school, say versus John Oliver or Princess Margaret, where I went later to go live with my dad. And a gentleman came down and he sold credit card numbers, and it became kind of like Christmas, where we were ordering things to the abandoned house across the street, and then we rented the abandoned house. But academically I was doing very well, and I had money to help out my mom. I had money to pay for groceries because we were very poor, and it was very positive in that sense, so I didn't really look at the consequences of what those actions may have been. But with that environment, there was a lot of popularity, and in a school where a lot of children have very rich parents, it allowed me to fit in. Where at the beginning I was the low man on the totem pole, and being able to order lots of things on the internet for fundamentally free and sell them, I was able to help out and create attachments and bonds.
And your grades were really good at that time? And
I was pretty much a straight A student. I took a lot of extra activities. I learned to play the baritone, the trumpet. I was in senior jazz band by grade 9. I acted in a few plays. I was Puck in Midsummer Night's Dream, and Svendrik and John Lazarus played Village of Idiots. So I was very much involved. So there's kind of two sides to my life. There's a very public face, which I looked really good, and then the underground side, where I used drugs, sold drugs, and bought items with blank credit card numbers. So there was that, but I was more focused on the intellectual side, because the other side was easy, but it became overwhelming at one point. And I guess by the end of grade 10, I sort of just left it aside.
oh, so you left that side, and then where did you do from there?
I decided to move to Surrey, where my dad lived. He was 5 years clean and sober and got a lot more stable. And so I went to go live with him. And I went to a school, Princess Margaret, and it was a very tumultuous time there.
At the school?
It was a very hard school. I was a very small minority in my school. Everyone was Indo-Canadian, and I was one of 10 white guys in my grade of a grade of 250 people. So very much a minority. And if you remember, in '96 was when they had the temple chair situation, where they had the sword fight at the Sikh temple. I had front seats to that event. And also you can remember that there was the killing of the janitor. It was a very interesting event because the students didn't know what was going on, but what had happened was somebody had come down from Texas from the KKK, and they killed somebody in the Sikh temple and pretty much said, if you don't stop the violence going on in these schools, we're going to come up and start a war. And it was night and day at the school. One day we were being picked on, the next day it's like, hello sir. There was definitely a shift, and we learned about what happened about that later.
Okay, so your experience really changed.
It did. And so in that school, I started, again, I got back into selling weed. It was just a culture of the school, and I became a compulsive shoplifter. And then I got caught, and I had to stand in front of Zellers with a sign that said I'm a thief. That was my dad's punishment.
Oh, your dad made you do that. That was your dad.
Yeah. He said, oh, you want to go to jail? Well, I'm going to sentence you to 6 months, and you're going to have to do this.
You did that for 6 months?
Oh, well, I got off on 2 months with good behavior.
And so what happened to you after that experience?
I couldn't shoplift again. I'd physically shake.
Oh, so that was the end of that?
That was the end. It worked. It worked very well. I don't recommend it. It was very degrading.
Because it may have not worked in some other ways.
Yeah. And I also had a couple of medical health issues. I had a seizure, and I was taken in by paramedics, and my dad didn't believe me that I had a seizure, and he kicked me out of the house. So temporarily I moved into my friend's house and did the first semester, finished that, and then I moved back to Vancouver with my mom and commuted back and forth. And that's how I got involved in politics with my mom again, and what happened in APEC in 1997. I was part of the Public Complaints Commission court case, and it was a 5-year legal battle. And we won our court case, which brought in the public watchdog over the RCMP. And that was a pretty big event. And that's where I met a lot of really good mentors. I met some strong men in my life, lawyers, black hole scientists, activists. And yeah, that became a very important part of my life.
So many different things in your life, like extremes.
It's just a lot of busyness.
Yeah.
It's like I did an exercise at Harbor Light called a timeline. And that's pretty much going through my life story. And when I actually look at it on paper, I'm like, wow, I've had a very fulfilling life. Even though a lot of bad stuff happened, a lot of good stuff happened too. Take a break for a second?
For sure, yeah.